Today we're joined by Locked On SEC's Chris Gordy with a little crossover action talking about Auburn and South Carolina, as well as where does Auburn stack up in the conference, and Bryan Harsin as a coach. Where is he in the conference? All that and more coming up on today's Locked On Auburn.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby. Little crossover action with Locked On SEC's own Chris Gordy. How are you, brother?
What's going on, Zach? I am starting to get a little depressed because I'm starting to look at the schedule this week, and one, there's a bunch of crappy games in the SEC, but two, the season's almost over, man. This time of year, it's always bittersweet, like, because we start talking about, the playoffs and bowl games and all this, but it's like, yeah, that means the end of college football season, and that sucks.
I know. It always flies by. It's crazy. Yeah, there's 2 games left. There's 2 games left, and for Auburn fans, I mean, it's even more depressing because, you're out, you're starting quarterback, and you lost pretty much most of the games that mattered this season, and you see teams ranked in the college football playoff rankings like Ole Miss and Arkansas, and it's like on the field, Auburn was significantly better than both of those teams, but it's just, that's the way it works. You got to win the games, right?
Well, I have my buddy Lynn Scarborough from Lindy Sports on the podcast today on Locked On SEC, and Lynn has been, Lynn's an Auburn alum, and he's been covering college football for a long time. He's been covering the SEC a long time, and he calls it like he sees it. He said last Saturday was the worst collapse or the worst loss in Auburn history, and I was like, "Good." I said, "Come on, Lynn." I said, "You've seen a lot of ego," and he used context. He said, "Look, I've seen them lose 49-0 before, but those were bad teams that had no expectations." He goes, "This team, like, we had expectations going, oh man, if they beat Alabama, and everybody thought, okay, in our minds, like, they have a chance, with Bo Nix had he been healthy, but like they had a chance." Yeah. And it was like, okay, we just need to take care of business. In a game, you had a 28-3 lead on Mississippi State, and then the collapse and how it went down. Again, I don't know if I'd say it was the worst loss in Auburn history, but it definitely, I think it would rank up there from a standpoint of collapses like that just don't happen.
Yeah. So Monday on the show, I said what happened Saturday was a fireable offense. I got some pushback there, but I just think the way you just absolutely fell apart. I mean, I just don't see there really being a whole lot of coming back from that. But folks, in the YouTube comment section were like, well, what about the week before? And I said it specifically to Derek Mason, no one else. And they were like, well, what about the week before when you scored 3 points against Texas A&M? Is that a fireable offense to Mike Bobo? And I said, no, because Texas A&M is the more talented team than Auburn is. You were also on the road, but at home against Mississippi State, a team that from a talent standpoint, Auburn is significantly better than. And that's what you did, even with a 25-point head start, like you said. I thought it was an absolute disaster. And I think that's going to be one that, however Harsin's tenure ends at Auburn, whether it's, 5 years from now when he found his success, whether it's a decade from now, whether it's 3 years from now, however long it is, this loss will be brought up whenever he leaves the Tigers.
It very well could, or it could be, this could be just a footprint on, an afterthought that, in his tenure. It's funny when you say a fireable offense, it's interesting because had this happened a year ago, like Gus Malzahn may be at the podium that morning, them announcing he's been fired or something like that. That could have been a year ago with a guy in his first year. And granted, look, it wasn't a tough situation to take over, but there were challenges in taking over this team and what it was and having a whole new staff and all that. I almost think of it as, and it's a weird comparison because Coach O's already been fired and he's finishing out the year, but Coach O's first year as a head coach, he lost a home game to Troy. And everybody was ready to fire him already. Like, he had been the interim and then was named the full-time head coach and lost to Troy. And everybody was like, that's unacceptable. LSU doesn't lose home games to Troy. Like, that's a fireable offense. And very quickly over the next 2 years, he brings in Joe Burrow, and then they win the national championship. And everybody completely forgot about the Troy loss. Like, it could be forgotten that quickly. This loss can be very quickly forgotten if Bryan Harsin does what he needs to do and takes those steps forward. Maybe he just needs to find a Joe Burrow in the transfer portal for next year.
That's it. That's all we're asking for. Just go find the next Joe Burrow. That'd be great. That'd be fantastic. Now, Gordy, you said, a rough slate of SEC games. I'm going to be honest. I haven't really looked at it other than Auburn, South Carolina, but Auburn, South Carolina doesn't get you fired up.
Well, it does from the standpoint, it is the lowest point spread. Like, it's the closest point spread in the SEC this week.
And so it's at 7.5 is last I saw.
Yeah, BetOnline's got it at 7.5 right now.
Gross.
And that's the closest game we have this weekend. Now, the games are going to play out differently. Like, Florida's an 8.5 point favorite at Mizzou. Does anybody in the right mind think Florida's going to cover that 8.5 against Mizzou? Like, Mizzou just had one of their best defensive showings last week against South Carolina. So, like, that one might actually be the most entertaining game. If Auburn does what they need to do and TJ Finley executes the offense and they run the ball well at South Carolina, Auburn should win and cover that 7.5. So, that's in my mind. But all the other games, like Ole Miss is a 36.5 point favorite over Vandy. Tennessee's a 4 touchdown favorite over South Alabama. I mean, this is cupcake week for a lot of teams, and this sucks. Like, if I could get rid of anything, like the SEC on SEC every week last year was rough. You need the non-conference games, but let's do what some of these other conferences do, where you play your 3-4 non-conference games at the start of the year, you get them all out the way, right, and then let's get into conference play. And it should be conference play the rest of the way. This is a tough sell think of how tough a sell this is for LSU fans at 4-6 with Louisiana Monroe coming to town. You think anybody's going to be going to this game? They'll tailgate, but everybody's going to go home and go watch some of the other games. Georgia's hosting Charleston Southern. You think their student section has any want to be there to watch Charleston Southern come in? Georgia's like, we're 10-0. We're already planning for the SEC title game. We're done with Charleston Southern and Georgia Tech. So the SEC needs to move past these. And again, if you're going to play a non-conference this week, keep it, but make this one of your Power 5 schools. Make an Alabama have to play in Indiana or something this week. That at least would be more entertaining than watching, I don't know, Tennessee State against Mississippi State.
So I thought something, and you mentioned this briefly, I thought something that was going to come from the COVID year last year, the whole gauntlet of playing SEC on SEC every week. I didn't think we'd be able to put that genie back in the lamp. I thought that was going to be something where it's like, okay, it was 2 less games, but man, that was awesome. 10 conference games. And we've been told for years that you can't add any more conference games. And it's like, oh, I think they're fine. I think all the guys held up just fine doing that. And it's weekends like this, like you said, where it's like, man, I wouldn't hate that. I wouldn't. Is that worth giving up 2 extra weeks of college football for? That's a different question.
I think a lot of the coaches don't want it. The weird thing is Saban has been at the forefront of saying go to 9 conference games. And I think the reasoning behind that is he knows he's got a juggernaut every year. He's got a monster that can bring it on. We don't care who the hell we play.
Absolutely.
But I think some of the other coaches, the Mark Stoops, the Mike Leach, they look at it and go, look, if I win 3 or 4 of my non-conference games, all I need to do is win 2 SEC games and I'm going to a bowl game and I've saved my job. Because most of that, like the standard we hold a lot of those middling coaches to is get bowl eligible. If you get bowl eligible, you're keeping your job. You can't be fired. You go, I went 7-5. Can't fire me. I went 7-5. So I think that's where a lot of those coaches are going to fight for those smaller schools. The other thing is, man, it's such huge paychecks for these schools. When Charleston Southern or Prairie View A&M gets that check for $1 million, that does so much for those programs. So while the football sucks and the entertainment value isn't very good, it does do a lot for those programs. But I just say get all those out at the start of the season. We should not be playing these this late in the year. But yeah, look, the other thing is too, inequality of schedules. I talk about all the time. A couple years ago, Bama in the East played Tennessee, who's a permanent crossover, who was terrible, and I think Vanderbilt, while LSU's 2 East opponents were Florida and Georgia. And Florida's their permanent. That's not an equal schedule. Like it's an absolute joke. And so I say all that to say Bama needs to play the Floridas and the Georgias way more often than they are, because it's silly that they get to avoid them 2-3 years at a time because of the crossovers.
Right. Yeah. And Tennessee being a joke as of late doesn't really help, but hey, maybe they're getting better. I want to get your thoughts on Auburn's quarterback situation in just a moment. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Made In. Made In produces professional quality cookware for those who love to cook. They source the finest materials and partnered with renowned craftsmen to make premium kitchen tools available directly to you without the markup. Made in products are made to last, and they offer a lifetime guarantee. I have a made in frying pan. I use it every chance I get. It's fantastic. Made in better cookware for better meals. Right now, Made in is offering our listeners 15% off your first order with promo code Locked On. That's one word, LOCKEDON. This is the best discount available anywhere online for Made in products. Go to madeincookware.com/locked on. Use promo code Locked On for 15% off your first order. That's madeincookware.com/locked on. Use promo code Locked On. Gordy, you covered Finley when he was at LSU. You've covered Finley now, obviously, when he's at Auburn. You see a lot less of him since he's been at Auburn, but do you think he's going to be ready after 1 week of essentially being the starter? We saw the whole end of the Georgia State game where he kind of bailed Bo Nix and the Auburn offense out against that game, but then there was that conversation of, is he possibly going to start going back to LSU? And obviously he didn't. He got one series there, and then Bo had a great game, but you think he's ready? You think he'll be ready for South Carolina on Saturday?
Yeah, the ironic part is his first start last year for LSU was against South Carolina, the South Carolina team. Now it's a little bit different personnel-wise. The guys who are he'll be facing in this game and that sort of thing. But some of the guys are the same. A different scheme too. Will Muschamp's not the one coaching anymore. But the thing I look back to that day, Zach, that he had going for him was he had the complement of a great run game. Ty Davis-Price ran for over 130 yards that day. John Emery had over 80 rushing yards that day. So he had two running backs who were doing their thing. It's as simple to say, if Auburn's going to be successful this weekend, it's because Tank Bigsby, Hunter, and those guys are doing their thing in the run game. If the run game is going, and I think South Carolina you're able to move the ball, and look what Tyler Beatty did to him a week ago. Tyler Beatty, by the way, one of my favorite back. I mean, he's my favorite running back in the SEC this year. He's the leading rusher. He is like, Mizzou has got what, like 5 wins? They'd have 0 if they didn't have Tyler Beatty. Like, he is their workhorse. He's one of the best running backs in the country this year. But that's the bottom line. Auburn's going to have to run the ball well and then have Finley, pass well off of that. Like, they can't go in saying, we're going to have Finley throw it 40 times and win this game. If you go back and look at that game against South Carolina last year, he was 17 for 21 for 265, 2 touchdowns and a pick. If you told me that's his stat line this weekend, I say Auburn wins that game.
Sure.
So, they're going to have to get him comfortable early. Get him some short passes, some comebackers, something where you can get he's moving the chains, builds a little confidence. Because, man, if they have a couple 3-and-outs early and South Carolina scores and suddenly they're in a deficit, I would feel nervous for Finley.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I was talking about this with Chandler Wooten, just like, how much confidence do you have going into a game knowing you played well against them the year before? And obviously he said it can be a lot. Situations change, like you said, but as a general rule, like, it helps you in preparation, it helps you with execution, and just the whole process of doing it over again. Well, so I think that's definitely important.
The only thing I'll say too is, like, last year, the South Carolina secondary, no offense to the current guys, but last year they had J.C. Horn and Izzy Muguamu, who were both draft picks. J.C. Horn was a top 10 draft pick, and he wasn't scared going against those guys. They don't have those guys in the South Carolina secondary. So it's almost like this is an even weaker South Carolina defense. Now, they're better up front. They get after it way more up front than last year's group did. But,
there's some irony in that, though, right? Because they've got a really good pass defense, and their rush defense kind of stinks. Yeah.
No, I mean, they've got some big time recruits. Jordan Birch obviously was a big time recruit, and they've got some guys up front, but they've been very inconsistent there. Like, some weeks they look good, they can get after it. Some weeks not. But I think a big part of that is they fall behind a lot. I mean, go look at a lot of their games in South Carolina this year. They've trailed in a lot of games. So, look, I think I have the confidence in Finley. I watched him last year as a freshman. The big thing that stood out to me in his time at LSU was that he was so calm. Nothing got to him. I mean, we even kind of saw it in was it Georgia State game? Georgia Southern? Yeah. I mixed the two up. Anyway,
yeah.
Georgia something went on when he came in and came from behind to beat them this year. He was poised, man. And even the incomplete passes or whatever, like, he went back to the huddle. It didn't faze him. And that's what I like about TJ Finley.
Yeah, he seems like a confident dude, and so hopefully that'll help him succeed over these last 2 weeks. What do you like about South Carolina's offense? I'm going to be honest. South Carolina and Vandy are the two teams I've watched the least in the conference for obvious reasons, but the players talk really highly about their running game.
So Kevin Harris, I loved last year in the SEC. He was one of the best running backs. I think towards the end of the year, it was between him and Najee Harris. I forget if they count the SEC championship yards, but whatever. Kevin Harris was the leading rusher down the stretch of last year in the SEC. He was tremendous. He has not been healthy this whole season. He was not healthy in the spring into the fall. They waited a game or two till he got in. Once he got in, you saw him run the ball, and you're like, this is not the same Kevin Harris. He's had a couple flashes here and there this year where he's looked like his old self, but overall he's not. I mean, even last week against Mizzou, he was 14 carries for 36 yards. Marshawn Lloyd and Zaquandre Wright are pretty good. Zaquandre Wright had 60 yards on a touchdown last week. It's kind of running back by committee at times, but because Harris is not his normal self, I wouldn't say this is a dominant run team, but they've got to run the ball. Like if South Carolina's going to have any success this week, they've got to run the ball, run it effectively. They're on to their third quarterback already this season, and Jason Brown. And, it is what it is. Zeb Nolan was a fun story for about a week or two. And, finally Luke Doty got back in there. Luke Doty had some moments, then he got hurt again. And then Zeb Nolan's out, so they've turned to Jason Brown now, who's a transfer that came in. And he's very average. I mean, they're getting average play from their quarterbacks. Receivers, Josh Vann is really the only one you have to worry about. He's had a nice season, but it starts with the run game. If Auburn is stopping the run or slowing down the run and they're forcing punts early, man, go down the field, get some points, capitalize, and put this thing away early, because Jason Brown does not have the arm against this Auburn secondary that, look, a week ago they didn't look great. I still think they got the horses and the scheme enough to not allow South Carolina to move the ball through the air on them.
Right. Gordy, you mentioned the lines for a lot of the games in the conference. If you feel confident about any of those, you need to head over to betonline.ag right now. BetOnline is back and better than ever. They've got a new revamped website, and their mobile site for your smart device is up to date and incredible. So be sure to check it out, whether it's basketball, as college basketball is back, or the NBA, the NFL, and of course college football. They have all of it at betonline.ag. When you make your first deposit, use promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. Gordy, going into the season, you predicted Brian Harsin to have the best season of all the first-year coaches in the SEC. Do you think that is going to come to fruition, or do you think what happened the last 2 weeks kind of holds him back a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I look at total wins. Auburn's 6-4 right now. Josh Heupel, I think, has been the big surprise for a lot of us. He's at 5-5. Tennessee finishes things off with South Alabama this weekend in Vandy. So Tennessee is 7-5. Yeah, go ahead and pencil that in for them. Auburn, again, if we're being real with ourselves, we're probably putting an L in the Iron Bowl. So probably both at 7-5. If that's what we're thinking. So I'd say it's a win-win for both. I don't think there's things this year where you could say Harsin has done better than Heupel, but on the flip side, man, what Heupel's done with what he was up against and all the transfers, all the guys who left, and the abysmal quarterback play with Jared Garantano the past few years. Yeah. He brought in two guys Hendon Hooker's, established himself as a starter. What he's gotten out of Hendon Hooker, he's got those guys believing they can win every week, and they're not afraid of anybody. So I probably, if they both finish 7-5, I give the slight nod to Heupel ahead of Harsin, but nothing to sniff at if Harsin finishes 7-5.
I get that. Absolutely. A guy that I've been enamored with and loved watching this year, probably my favorite player to watch in the conference this year, is Roger McCreary, Auburn's standout corner. Where do you think he ranks among the corners in this league? I know he's kind of always number two to, that hot shot down in LSU as far as like corners in the, going into this draft class, but I'd put his play up against anybody's.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing to remember, Stingley only played in 3 games. Eli Ricks played in 4 or 5 before both those guys were done. So Two of the better corners in the SEC, not only the country, have not played much this year. If we're just talking the SEC, the Bama DBs have been very average. They haven't had the stellar play they normally get out of their guys. Georgia's DB, Georgia has such a good rotation of guys back there, though, that it's like, I don't know if I'd pin one of the Georgia DBs the best.
Georgia's DBs they get so much help from their pass rush too. Right. Like, how much is that? Is that just them? I think that's just a collection of just dominant athletes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like if I was gonna say like best linebacker in the conference, Will Anderson is the best pass rushing linebacker in the SEC. Yeah. If I'm just saying best total overall linebacker, I'd go Nakobe Dean at Georgia. He's had a heck of a year. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as far as corners go, I think isn't McCurry's at like double-digit passes defense this year? He's
Pro Football Focus has him as the number one player in the country in that stat.
Yeah, he's gotten his hands on a lot of football. So yeah, if I had to go with just maybe a field general, best overall play in the secondary, I'd probably go McCurry in the SEC.
Yeah, no, he's been fun to watch. There's no question about it. Well, man, so just in case I don't talk to you before the Iron Bowl, what does Auburn need to do to make an upset happen?
Okay, you ready for this? I'm going to give you a little confidence here.
Oh, okay.
What nobody's talked about with the LSU-Alabama game last year. TJ Finley started that game. LSU's defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. We know why Bo Pelini is somewhere sitting on a private island sipping martinis, enjoying his millions of dollars right now.
Good for him, yeah.
The Alabama scored on I think it was just about every possession in the first half of that game. It was touchdown. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, TJ Finley, they get the ball Bama scores first at 7-0. LSU gets the ball. They drive the ball all the way down to, I think it's Bama's 14-yard line. It was a 4th and 1. They run the ball. They don't get it. It's stuffed. It's a turnover on downs.
Right.
The next possession, TJ Finley, they go 3 and out. They punt the ball. The next 2 possessions, LSU goes down the field and scores touchdowns with TJ Finley navigating them. So that's basically, if they don't turn the ball, if they get the 4th and 1 on the first drive, that's 3 of their first 4 possessions. TJ Finley went right down the field on Alabama's defense. Guess what? Alabama's secondary is worse this year than it was last year. I'm just giving you a little primer of it is possible. Finley can, don't be afraid of, we're just not going to be able to move the ball in Alabama. No, you can move the ball in this Alabama team this year. And oh, by the way, the offense isn't what it normally is. Don't look at the stats last week against New Mexico State. It was New Mexico State. Go look 2 weeks ago when they were playing LSU's 2nd and 3rd stringers, and they were getting blitzed and I think if anything, Derek Mason needs to call LSU and talk to Ed Ogeron and say, man, give me some of those blitz schemes you guys were dialing up against Bama, because that worked. Bryce Young, at times this year under pressure, he makes good throws. At times he doesn't. In that LSU game, he missed he was under pressure a lot. So if I'm Auburn, my MO in that game is, again, I think Finley, if he stays poised and confident in the pocket, delivers the throws, roll out with his feet, buy some time, find your open receiver, I think he can do that. But defensively, I think get after it, man. I'd blitz like crazy, send some of those safeties, get those DBs involved and put pressure on Bama. And look, if they beat you over the top, they beat you over the top. Jameson Williams is tremendous downfield. But I'm just telling you, even with no Bo Nix, Auburn will have a chance in that Iron Bowl.
I love that. And people listening are fired up right now. I'm fired up. So, no, I think that'd be incredible. And, I think Harsin can put together a game plan. It's just, does he have the dudes to be able to execute exactly what he has in mind? And, there's so many folks upset with his defense right now. But for the vast majority of the season, the defense has played really, really well. And so we'll see what Derek Mason dials up and he's able to slow down a passing attack with Bryce Young and company. But Gordy, appreciate you hanging out, man. I know you're a busy guy. How can folks find you and hear you and support you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, wherever you find your podcast, just search Locked On SEC. LockedOnSEC.com is an easy way to go. Again, Lynn Scarborough's on with us. We also had a great conversation with Ben Hartsock, former NFL tight end. He calls a lot of games on ESPN Radio. He called an Auburn game earlier this year. He was very complimentary of Brian Harsin. So you want to go back and check out that podcast.
Cool. Gordy, appreciate it, man. We'll be back tomorrow right here on Locked On Auburn.